Hi, it's Steph, and today I'm going to share with you 15 spring blooming perennials that aren't bulbs. With spring right around the corner, it's the perfect time to take inventory of our gardens and to decide where we need more color. This will extend the amount of time that we get to enjoy our gardens because each season you will have things that come into bloom. I have been doing this over the last several years, and each season I find where there are gaps in my garden and I try to fill those in. And now with the nurseries opening up shortly and the garden centers, it will be the perfect time to go shopping for any of these plants that you may not already have in your garden. So I'm going to share with you a list of 15 perennials that will give you early season color in spring. So here is my list.
Hellebore. Depending on your zone, this perennial plant can bloom as early as December and as late as April. When they bloom will depend on both their species and your climate. Once in bloom, they stay in bloom for a long time. The foliage is evergreen, and the broad, shiny leaves make them an excellent ground cover. Hellebore are also deer and rabbit resistant. They prefer partial to full shade during the summer months, but require more sunlight in winter. This makes them a great plant for planting under deciduous trees, where they are shaded by foliage in summer, but will be exposed to full sun after the tree drops its leaves in fall. Hellebore prefer moist, well-draining soil and are hardy in zones 3 through 9. There are so many beautiful varieties and colors to choose from, single petal and frilly double petals, as well as a wide range of beautiful colors. Creeping Phlox. Creeping phlox is a low-growing, mat-forming plant that is often seen spreading as ground cover in rock gardens and even in crevices of stone walls. It blooms in the late spring to summer. In my garden, it blooms in April, shortly after my daffodils have finished blooming. Creeping phlox grows best in full sun to partial shade and prefers well-draining soil. It's hardy in zones 5 through 9. Creeping phlox comes in many colors: lavender, purple, shades of pink, and even white. I have 2 varieties of creeping phlox growing in my garden, a very beautiful pale lavender color, and I also have a pretty fuchsia pink color. One of which I have growing outside my driveway walls, and the other I have growing over the edge of a retaining wall. Here alongside the creeping phlox, I also have a plant called Armeria, or sea thrift. It's another perennial that begins blooming in early spring and with regular deadheading will bloom through the fall. The flowers are small, round clusters of blooms held on short, stiff stems over a tiny mat of grassy, evergreen foliage. Armeria needs well-drained soil and is not suitable for rich, moisture-retentive loam or clay. It is well adaptable to coastal growing conditions with salt spray. Its compact size makes it a perfect plant for rock gardens, containers, and the front of a border. Armeria is also a water-wise plant and is pretty drought tolerant. It does best in full sun and is hardy in zones 4 through 8. Bearded Iris. Bearded Iris is a gorgeous spring to early summer perennial. It's grown by rhizomes that are easily dividable and they multiply, so they're a great pass-along plant. There are so many gorgeous varieties that your options are nearly endless. They have strappy green foliage that look like upright swords, and their foliage looks great most of the growing season. They will bloom best in full sun, getting 6+ hours of sun a day. Also, be sure not to plant your rhizomes too deep, which could be a reason to cause the plant to not bloom as well. There are even reblooming varieties of bearded iris that will bloom in early spring and will repeat bloom again 6 to 8 weeks later. Whether you have a cottage-style garden or a formal-style garden, this stately plant fits right in. I have several varieties of iris growing in my garden, and I just love them. Iris prefer loose, well-draining soil and are hardy in zones 3 through 9. Lungwort, also known as pulmonaria, is a clump-forming perennial with beautiful, fuzzy foliage that can either be speckled or look streaked with flecks of iridescent color. In early spring, lungwort blooms with little bell-shaped flowers. Depending on the variety, the color of the blooms can range from purple, pink, and blue. What's interesting about this plant is that I have found that the foliage is smaller while the plant is in bloom. And once the blooms are done, the foliage gets much larger. Lungwort is a shade plant. If you have it in a sunny spot, morning dappled sun is best, as afternoon sun would be too hot and cause the leaves to scorch. I've learned this lesson from experience. It prefers well-draining, moist soil and is hardy in zones 3 through 8. Columbine, or Aquilegia. These happy plants begin blooming near the end of bulb season, in early to mid-spring, adding a pop of color right when your garden needs it. They have beautiful, delicate foliage that's also really pretty even when the flowers aren't in bloom. Columbines are compact plants, but are loaded with flowers, and come in solid colors and bicolors, including pink, red, blue, purple, yellow, and white. Columbine prefers a dappled shade position in hotter climates, but does well in sunny spots and cooler climates. They aren't fussy about soil conditions and are hardy in zones 3 through 9. Over the last couple of years, I have added several varieties of columbine to my garden, both from plants that I've purchased, bare root, and even some that I've started from seed. They are really fun and beautiful spring flower. Dicentra, or bleeding hearts, another really beautiful spring blooming perennial that has heart-shaped blooms, hence the name bleeding heart. They come in beautiful shades of pink, red, and even white, and you can find some with green foliage as well as a beautiful golden foliage. They prefer a part sun location in a woodland setting, which is where they naturally grow. They also like a moist but well-draining soil and are hardy in zones 3 through 9. Salvia. It's important to note that there are annual salvia varieties as well as perennial types. The annual types will bloom the entire season and then die off at your first frost and not return. The perennial type will bloom for a few weeks in the season and rebloom with a second flush if deadheaded, and then be done, but will return year after year. Salvia is a gorgeous upright spike bloom plant that blooms in early spring and is a perfect companion to roses. The variety I grow is called May Night, and it is perennial. It has a very deep purple color. The pollinators absolutely love this plant, and the deer and rabbits stay away from it. Salvia grows quickly and is easy to divide. Prefers a moist, well-draining soil, but is also pretty drought tolerant once it's established. It blooms best and stays most upright in full sun. Salvia is hardy in many zones depending on the variety that you're growing and whether it's perennial versus annual. Nepeta, or catmint. Just as the name suggests, it's part of the mint family. It is a wonderful and fragrant perennial that pollinators also adore. Pests such as deer and rabbit stay away from it, and it blooms for a really long time. Even after the blooms begin to fade, the calyx is purple, which makes the plant appear to still have some purple coloring. Deadheading, the nepeta will keep it blooming longer. Nepeta comes in different sizes and heights. You're bound to find something that fits your garden. Nepeta requires full sun and good drainage. It's drought tolerant once established and is hardy in zones 3 through 9. Peonies. Is there a more beautiful flower in spring than a peony? My favorite is Sarah Bernhardt, and it's amazingly fragrant. Herbaceous peonies bloom for a couple of weeks in spring, but are well worth the wait. They're so fragrant and provide such fluffy, gorgeous blooms. Many newer gardeners fret when they begin to see ants on their peonies. But no worries, the ants are harmless and are just feeding on the nectar. Peony flowers provide food for ants, and in turn, the ants protect the blossoms from other floral-feeding insects. Shortly after seeing the ants, your beautiful peony will start to bloom. The herbaceous peonies are the most popular, but do require some staking to keep the plant upright, as the weight of the blooms can make them flop a bit. The Ito peony is a cross between a herbaceous peony and a tree peony, and they are a bit more upright and sturdy. And the tree peony is a tree and is the most sturdy, requiring no staking. Peonies bloom best in full sun but can tolerate part sun. They prefer moist, well-draining soil and are hardy in zones 3 through 8. Geum, or Avens. They are hardy, long-blooming perennials that come into bloom in late spring. The blooms look like dainty rosettes and are just stunning. They come in various colors, including shades of yellow, orange, red, or pink. The foliage also stays pretty evergreen in my Zone 6 garden. I grow a beautiful variety called Mai Tai. Geums enjoy full sun to part shade and medium moisture, but well-draining soil. It's a pollinator magnet and deer and rabbit resistant. Geum is hardy in zones 4 through 9. Pincushion flower, or Scabiosa. Scabiosa also has annual varieties commonly grown from seed for cut flower gardening, and some short-lived perennial varieties such as the variety I grow in my garden called Butterfly Blue. This is a short-lived perennial, meaning it may only return for a few seasons, as opposed to longer-lived perennials which will return for many seasons. I have had this plant in my garden for a couple of years now, and I just love how long it blooms. This plant will begin to bloom in very early spring and will continue to bloom all season long through frost. It's my longest blooming perennial. In my opinion, it deserves a spot in every flower garden. Pollinators also love this plant. It has a beautiful lavender bloom that measures about 2 inches across, atop a wiry stem with a neat mounded clump of foliage below. This plant prefers full sun and a well-draining soil, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 9. Jacob's Ladder, or Polemonium. I added this plant to my garden last season, and I immediately loved the fern-like foliage. And add that to the beautiful dainty blue blooms in early spring, and you have yourself a winning combination. The foliage is available in both solid green and in variegated varieties. Jacob's Ladder does best in part sun. Some sun will help it bloom, but protection from the hot afternoon sun will help the leaves not scorch. The variety I have in my garden is called Heaven Scent, and it does have a light fragrance. It prefers moist, well-draining soil, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 7. Brunnera, a gorgeous foliage perennial that has an iridescent silver coloring. In the evening, Brunnera appears to glow. In mid-spring, Brunnera will send up sprays of the most beautiful dainty blue blooms that stay in bloom for about 3 to 4 weeks. The light blue flowers with yellow centers have 5 petals and resemble forget-me-nots. Similar to Pulmonaria, the leaves will also be smaller while the plant is in bloom. But once their blooms are done, the leaves grow to their impressive size, and they make a real impact in a shady spot in the garden. Brunnera grows best in part shade to shade and in well-draining but moderately moist soil. Brunnera is hardy in zones 3 through 8. Amsonia, a perennial that is not only beautiful for its dainty true blue blooms in spring, but also for its impressive golden fall foliage. A friend shared a variety of Amsonia with me called Blue Star, and last season I also purchased a variety called Hobrectii. The Hobrectii variety has a thread-like foliage that provides additional texture in the garden. Amsonia is native to North America. It prefers full sun, moist but well-draining soil. Hardiness will vary with the species. Most are perennial to at least a USDA hardiness zone 3 through 11. Baptisia, or false indigo. It will grow in partial shade to full sun. Baptisia has a deep taproot, which makes it drought tolerant, but also makes it really difficult to transplant. So choose a planting spot wisely. The flowers that appear in the spring are typically deep blue, but they can range in colors from pink to yellow to white. And while Baptisia doesn't bloom for long, the foliage is a beautiful blue-green coloring and looks lovely when used in cut flower arrangements. It also provides lovely texture in the garden and makes a great backdrop for other perennials. Baptisia prefers a well-draining soil, and it is hardy in zones 3 through 9.
Well, that was my list. What did you think? Are there any perennials that you currently grow in your garden that is a favorite? Or did you find something new that you might want to add to your garden this season? Whether you have a shady garden or a sunny garden, I'm sure there was something on this list that you can think about adding to extend your season of blooms. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I'll catch you in the next one.